It is one of the darkest and most unsettling mysteries in German history. A quiet farmhouse, buried deep in the Bavarian countryside, becomes the scene of a massacre so chilling that it continues to baffle investigators, historians, and crime enthusiasts more than a century later. 6 people brutally murdered, a killer who may have lived among their bodies for days, and a trail of clues that lead nowhere. This is not simply a crime story. It is a puzzle wrapped in blood and silence. Tonight, we revisit the haunting tale of the Hinterkaifeck murders. To understand the horror of what happened at Hinterkaifeck, we must first step back into the world of 1920s rural Bavaria. Germany was still reeling from the devastation of the First World War. Communities were marked by poverty, grief, and suspicion. The countryside was dotted with small, isolated farms, and one of these was Hinterkaifeck, located about 70 kilometers north of Munich. The Gruber family lived there: Andreas, 63, his wife, Cecilia, 72, their widowed daughter, Victoria, 35, and Victoria's 2 children, little Cecilia, 7, and Joseph, just 2. Life on the farm was hard and often lonely, yet the Grubers were not an ordinary family in the eyes of the villagers. Rumors swirled constantly, casting shadows on their reputation. Andreas was deeply disliked by his neighbors. He was a harsh man with a reputation for cruelty and arrogance. More disturbingly, Andreas had been convicted of incest with his daughter Victoria. Though the conviction had been served, the scandal lingered like a stain. Many villagers believed that Joseph, Victoria's young son, was actually Andreas's child. Others insisted that the boy's real father was a local farmer named Lorenz Schlittenbauer, who had once been romantically involved with Victoria. The tension between these stories meant that the family's reputation was toxic, and their relationships with neighbors were strained. Adding to the mystery was the departure of their longtime maid, who left the farm 6 months before the murders. She claimed the house was haunted. She heard footsteps in the attic at night, though no one was there. She felt the sensation of being watched, and she could not stand the constant unease. After she left, Andreas himself began to notice strange occurrences. In the winter of 1922, he found footprints in the snow, leading from the woods to the farmhouse. Curiously, there were no tracks leading back. Keys to the house went missing. He discovered a newspaper from Munich on the property that no one in the family had bought. Despite these warnings, the family carried on with their lives. They did not know that the danger they feared was already inside their walls. March 31st, 1922, was the last day the Grubers were seen alive. That Friday, Victoria and her mother attended church and returned home at dusk. Later that evening, something drew members of the family into the barn. Perhaps it was a noise among the cattle, perhaps a disturbance designed to lure them outside. What happened next is a matter of grim reconstruction. Andreas entered first. He was struck with a mattock, a sharp and heavy farm tool, which crushed his skull. His wife followed, killed in the same brutal fashion. Victoria was next. She appeared to have been strangled before suffering devastating head wounds. Finally, little Cecilia, just 7 years old, stepped into the barn. She too was attacked, but evidence showed that she survived for hours afterward. Her jaw was shattered, and in her agony and fear, she tore out clumps of her own hair before dying. The killer dragged the 4 bodies into a pile, covering them with straw and wooden boards. Then, the murderer turned to the house. Inside, Joseph was struck dead in his crib, a baby with no chance to escape. Maria Baumgartner, the new maid who had only arrived that very day, was bludgeoned to death in her bedroom. 6 people were gone. The horror of the killings was matched only by what happened afterward. The killer did not leave immediately. Instead, he stayed on the farm. Over the next several days, neighbors noticed smoke rising from the chimney. Livestock were cared for. Fresh meals were eaten in the kitchen. Someone lived in the farmhouse, calmly carrying out the daily routine while 6 bodies lay cold nearby. The thought alone that a murderer could live among the corpses, sleeping under the same roof, is one of the most chilling aspects of the entire case. On April 4th, concerned neighbors finally went to the farm. Victoria's daughter had not appeared at school, the family had missed Sunday church, and mail had piled up. When they entered the barn, they were greeted by the grisly discovery: 4 bodies stacked in straw. The rest of the farmhouse revealed the maid and baby Joseph, also murdered. The scene was a nightmare. Police descended on the farm, but the investigation was flawed from the start. The crime scene was not secured, and villagers swarmed through the property, contaminating evidence. Forensic science was primitive at the time, and opportunities to gather useful clues were quickly lost. Nevertheless, investigators noted key details. The barn door showed no forced entry. Footprints in the snow led to the farm, but none led back out. The attic contained signs that someone had been living there, disturbed hay and discarded food scraps. This raised the terrifying possibility that the killer had been hiding in the house for days, even weeks before striking. Attention turned quickly to Lorenz Schlittenbauer, Victoria's neighbor and former lover. He was one of the men who discovered the bodies. Witnesses later recalled his strange behavior. He unlocked doors without hesitation, as though he knew his way around. He also seemed oddly calm, even making disturbing remarks about the deaths. Some villagers became convinced he was guilty, but no evidence tied him to the murders, and his name was eventually cleared. Other suspects were considered. Traveling vagrants and beggars were questioned. Suspicion even fell on Victoria's late husband, with rumors claiming he had not actually died in the war and had returned for revenge. Another theory suggested that deserters or former soldiers had taken refuge in the attic, suffering from trauma and eventually lashing out. Robbery was quickly dismissed as a motive. Money and valuables were untouched. Revenge was more plausible. Andreas had many enemies, yet no one could prove who would have committed such a crime. The investigation dragged on for years. In 1923, the farm was demolished and crowds gathered to watch. During demolition, a blood-stained mattock was discovered hidden in the attic. It was almost certainly the murder weapon. But by then, too much time had passed for the discovery to lead anywhere. The case resurfaced in the 1940s and 1950s. At one point, a woman came forward claiming her brother had confessed to the murders before dying, but her story could not be confirmed. Decades later, in 2007, German police reopened the files and used modern criminal profiling techniques. Their conclusion was chilling. The killer was almost certainly someone local, someone who knew the family well, and who held a personal grudge. The profiler even named a suspect, but out of respect for surviving relatives, the name was never made public. Even with modern techniques, the case remained unsolved. The Hinterkaifeck murders remain one of the most horrifying and baffling unsolved crimes in history. The brutality of the attack, the eerie details of someone living in the farmhouse afterward, and the absence of any clear motive combine to create a mystery that refuses to die. It is a case that raises endless questions. Who lured the family into the barn? Who moved comfortably through the house, eating meals as if nothing had happened? Was it a neighbor, a spurned lover, a desperate wanderer, or someone even closer to home? Was the motive jealousy, revenge, or something darker still? More than 100 years later, the farm is gone, the suspects are dead, and the answers are buried with them. Yet the legend of Hinterkaifeck lives on. It is a grim reminder that evil sometimes hides in plain sight, that the walls of even the most ordinary homes can conceal unthinkable horrors. So, what do you think? Was the murderer someone from the community, or an outsider who slipped away without a trace? Share your theories in the comments below. And if you want more chilling true crime stories from around the world, subscribe to this channel and join us next time for another tale of mystery, horror, and unanswered questions.